Hi, my name is Paulus Tjiang. I am a glass blower. I live in rural Ontario, where we operate Frantic Farm's clay glass and gallery. My wife is a potter. I'm a glass blower. I've been blowing glass since 1985, and I love it. So I started glass blowing because I came across a film at the Toronto Public Library back in the day when they used to rent, or they used to loan out 16mm films, and this long before YouTube. And I came across this film. It was called The Masters of Murano, and it was a documentary about glass blowers in Venice. And I found it incredibly fascinating, and that was the spark. And then I kind of moved along, and somehow I ended up art school, and it so happened that at art school, the Ontario College of Art, they were teaching glass blowing. So I enrolled in glass blowing at art school, and then never turned back.
Hi, I'm Becky Lozon. I work for Paulus. I am his personal glass assistant. So I originally went to school for artist blacksmithing and then had the opportunity to try glass blowing and just kind of caught the bug. The way the glass moves and how you kind of work together as a team really drew me in, and I just haven't stopped since.
So in this particular piece, it's called a Splash Dram Glass. It's referred to as a dram glass, a dram being an eighth of an ounce, in reference to the consumption of alcohol, which there was historically a practice called dramming in the day when there were a lot of serfs or people who did not have, there was not organized labor. They would just kind of wander around the countryside and pick up work. So it refers to a time in Scotland when these people, you could get them to do things at the factory, and you paid them with a drink, right? So it was called dramming. So and I could be corrected, but it used to be you'd move a barrel for a dram. So they basically moved 8 barrels for 1 ounce of alcohol, and that was their drink. And alcohol at a certain time was considered, it was a safe thing to drink because water, Europe was polluted a little bit, especially around cities. So if you drank alcohol, it was okay because it was polluted. So they would get an ounce to move 8 barrels. It's kind of quite a bit of water. The splash sequence refers to the actual motion of the design. When you hold up the piece, it is meant to emulate a wave or a splash. So you see the little curls, and that's why I do little curls on the end. So when I go in, I actually dip that initial gather a couple of times, and it's kind of like splashing in the glass. Though the glass, the viscosity is not correct to actually get a splash. It does draw a little bit of extra glass, and then I tweak it with tools to make it look more like a splash. So that's a splash dram glass. It has a tendency to blow towards the heat, so wherever you cool it, it'll always be a little bit thicker. So I want my walls and the upper end where it's going to get cracked off later to be relatively thin, as well as it's a cup. So you don't want the rim of a cup to be very thick. It would be uncomfortable for people to use. And then I'm hanging it down. I'm using gravity to just stretch it out and form. It's a very natural force, gravity. You don't have to pay for it. And there it is, it's stretched out. A little bit of air to expand the volume. I'm using the blades to keep the sides straight-ish. That's referred to as a neckline. That's where it's going to be cracked off later and finished. Okay, so it's a little fatter than I like, so I'm going to go in and give it a bit of heat, and then I'm going to let gravity stretch it out, and that's going to develop a little more of a teardrop form. finding the curvature a bit, cooling the bottom. And then I touch the neckline, just to make sure that it'll crack off nicely. A little bit of compressed air to cool this. So back in ancient times, like in Mesopotamia, instead of compressed air, they would have used a tool that was like probably a little stick, and they would have had a slave back here, because labor was cheap for the most part. You'll notice I also have a blow hose right here. So this allows me to blow into the pipe while it leaves two hands free. So that's relatively modern. So 1,000 years ago they would have had a dedicated slave over here that would have been asked to blow into the pipe, and they would blow into the pipe whenever it was necessary. Okay. So I'm going into the furnace to draw the decorative parts, the little hippie. Tool here, and I'm just going to do a couple of little decorative strokes, and then I'm going to shape the glass at the bottom where the little ball is going to match the foot. Do little turns just to make it interesting. I think of these kind of like little waves. So the little turns are like the crest of the waves. Becky's now going to gather a foot just as my ball is cooling off. It's going to bring me a little bit of piece of glass that I will form into the little flat foot. Shape the little gob of glass into a little flat disc with the use of this footing tool, which is 2 pieces of cherry wood that's been slightly shaped with a little metal tong to help spring it open. Squeeze. And it's still a little hot. You can see there's a bit of color. I'm going to finish the shape. I like a little bit of a triangular form here. This also ensures that it'll sit flat nicely. The little ring here with a little indentation. And a little air to cool it. Becky's now preparing the punty, or the pontille, which is a little gob of glass on another steel iron. And it'll fuse to the bottom of this. I'm going to crack this off so that we can form the lip. Very carefully heat the top without overheating the bottom. And then we're going to stretch that out and trim it so that it becomes a nice, neat finish. After the transfer, Becky's going to take this over and she knocks off the punty and then she torches the bottom so any rough spot is smoothed out. Put the tools back there, you see her back there. And then she actually embosses it with a little stamp, a little steel stamp that I have that has my initials. So all my pieces have a little PT marking on it. And then she takes it and places it in the annealing oven, which removes the thermal stress, the mechanical stresses. The oven currently is at about 500 Celsius. And then that will sit there all day, and when we're done at the end of the day, we program it to come down very slowly over the course of about somewhere between 14 and 16 hours. And then the pieces will come out tomorrow, and they'll be ready to go. The sequence is very similar to that last piece, the Splash Dram, except the ball that we put the foot on is pulled directly from the gather, and then the applied decoration is placed on top. These tools really have not changed in thousands of years. The development has been in metal technologies generally better. Our tools have not really changed. The glass behaves about the same. It flows. There might be, the glasses may have been a little more viscous or a little less viscous, but that's a very minor thing. The basic technique of creating things hasn't really changed significantly. There's been a few innovations, like for instance, blowing. The idea of expanding it by putting air into it and figuring that out. That has loosely been around since 1st century BC. So what I'm doing is about 2,200, 2,300 years old, approximately. And variations of that have been around for thousands of years now. So there are different styles of working in glass, and I'm born of the studio art glass movement, which is actually very new, and it has its origins from about the 1960s, 1970s, where individual artisans work alone in a studio. Before the studio art glass movement, glass was relegated to workshops with teams of people. And with teams of people doing dedicated jobs, there would be somebody at the furnace, somebody forming, somebody managing the color or different aspects of it. So I work, it's a bit of a hybrid in that often I work with an assistant. And my assistant helps me kind of move along. We try and create a sequence, and it's very much like playing a piece of music where it's orchestrated, where something is going on elsewhere and then comes together, but we're actually working on the same piece. Very much like a piece of music, but it's a piece of glass. So in the sequence that I was working on today, where the glass, my assistant actually draws the glass and does some of the initial work and then brings it to me, and I do the creative forming and the assembly components. So interestingly enough, very traditionally, that's how glass would have been done in antiquity, right? There would have been a primary gaffer and probably people drawing glass, doing things. And we also know that the creation of glass or the making of glass often was a separate activity from forming glass. There's evidence that glass was actually created as an industrial product in separate furnaces, and then little ingots or bricks of glass were shipped to workshops and remelted and then made into objects. So that is a very traditional method, and then I do a little hybrid thing where I have an individual working for me. So there are a grouping of objects in antiquity. It's done in a technique similar to this, and they're referred to as snake trails, right? Because the trails are done in such a way that they emulate snakes. Tools have not really changed. The technology has not really changed. It's an application of heat. We have electronic controls and electricity, and like propane gas, while they did it with wood. So we're going to do, the next one will be a foil trail. Foil. It's a little bit more glass than it's not huge. Okay. It's not a brand new one. There are subtle differences with each time we make a piece. And similarly, it's like we're doing the same thing over and over again. Each piece is slightly different. You know, the wind blows, it cools, the gather comes a little sized differently. There will be, every once in a while, that object, even though they're similar, the one object that is just spectacular, has as though fate meant that object to be that great moment. So we look for the moments, but we don't contrive to have every moment